I stood in my childhood bedroom folding the last of my clothes into a worn duffel bag, while downstairs my mother, Linda, counted $5 million worth of inheritance checks at the kitchen table. Just 20 minutes earlier, she had looked me straight in the eye and told me to pack my things because she didn't need me anymore now that she was wealthy. What she didn't know was that I had been secretly recording her cruel words and heartless behavior for the past 6 months, waiting for exactly this moment when her mask would finally slip completely off. As I zipped up my final suitcase, I couldn't help but smile, knowing she had just made the biggest mistake of her life by revealing her true nature on camera. Growing up in Columbus, Ohio, I learned early that my mother's love came with conditions I could never meet. While my father, Robert, built his successful insurance company from nothing, working 16-hour days to provide for our family, Linda treated me like an expensive inconvenience she had to endure. Every achievement I earned seemed to annoy her rather than make her proud. When I made the varsity football team as a sophomore, she rolled her eyes and complained about having to wash grass stains out of my uniform. During my senior year, when I earned a full scholarship to Ohio State, she spent the celebration dinner talking about how quiet the house would finally be. The pattern became crystal clear during my high school graduation. While other parents beamed with pride and snapped countless photos, Linda scheduled herself a spa day in Cincinnati, claiming she needed to recover from all the stress of my teenage years. Dad attended alone, his disappointment visible as he tried to record everything on his phone to show her later. She never watched a single video. When I asked her why she missed such an important milestone, she shrugged and said, "Graduations were boring ceremonies for people who needed external validation. College brought no improvement in our relationship." As the starting quarterback for Ohio State, I played in front of crowds of over 100,000 people, yet Linda never attended a single game. Dad would drive down from Columbus every Saturday, rain or shine, cheering from the stands and wearing my jersey number. Linda claimed football was a waste of time and refused to understand why grown men got so excited about young men running around with a ball. She seemed genuinely annoyed when local newspapers wrote articles about my performance, as if my success somehow reflected poorly on her. The worst part wasn't her absence during my victories, but her presence during my struggles. When I tore my ACL during junior year and had to undergo surgery, Dad arranged for the best orthopedic surgeon in Columbus and took time off work to drive me to every physical therapy appointment. Linda complained constantly about the medical bills, even though Dad's insurance covered everything. She made cutting remarks about how clumsy athletes always got hurt and suggested maybe this injury was a sign I should focus on something more practical than sports. After college, I moved back home while starting my career as an IT specialist at Huntington Bank. Dad welcomed me warmly and encouraged me to save money for my own place. But Linda made it clear she considered my presence an imposition. She charged me rent that was higher than most apartments in the area, claiming she needed to teach me about real-world expenses. When I suggested the amount seemed excessive, she accused me of being entitled and ungrateful for all the sacrifices she had made raising me. The dynamic in our household became increasingly toxic as Linda's resentment toward me grew more obvious. She would cook elaborate meals for herself and Dad, but leave me to fend for myself, claiming I was old enough to handle my own nutrition. During family gatherings with relatives, she would make subtle digs about my financial dependence, while praising cousins who had moved out earlier, conveniently ignoring that most of them had received down payment assistance from their parents. Dad tried his best to compensate for Linda's coldness, taking me to baseball games and asking about my work at the bank. He would slip me extra money when Linda wasn't looking and apologize quietly for her behavior, though he never confronted her directly about it. Robert had always been a peacekeeper, believing that keeping Linda happy was the key to maintaining family stability. Looking back, I realize he was probably as trapped by her manipulation as I was, just in different ways. The first signs of Dad's illness appeared during the spring of my 25th birthday. He started losing weight rapidly and complained of persistent stomach pain that he initially attributed to work stress. Linda seemed more irritated than concerned about his symptoms, suggesting he was being dramatic and should just take some antacids. When Dad finally agreed to see a doctor after weeks of discomfort, the diagnosis hit our family like a lightning bolt: pancreatic cancer, stage 3, with a prognosis that made everyone in the room fall silent. Suddenly, Linda transformed into the picture-perfect devoted wife, but only when other people were watching. At the oncologist's office, she held Dad's hand and asked detailed questions about treatment options, playing the role of concerned spouse flawlessly. She researched cancer support groups and started posting inspirational messages on social media about their journey together. Friends and neighbors praised her dedication and strength during such a difficult time. Behind closed doors, however, Linda's behavior told a completely different story. She complained constantly about the disruption to her routine and the financial burden of medical expenses despite Dad's excellent insurance coverage through his business. She started making comments about how expensive I was to maintain and how she would finally have some peace when it was just her and the inheritance money. The cruelty of her timing made my stomach turn, but Dad was too sick to notice her subtle digs at both of us. During Dad's chemotherapy treatments, Linda would bring magazines about luxury travel and spend the sessions browsing cruise ship websites while he tried to rest between medication rounds. She printed out brochures for expensive condominiums in Florida and left them strategically placed around the house, where Dad would see them during his brief moments of energy. When he questioned whether she should be making such plans while he was fighting for his life, she claimed she was just trying to stay positive about their future together. The most disturbing change in Linda was how she started talking about Dad's business with his partner, Frank. She began attending meetings she had never shown interest in before, asking detailed questions about company valuations and life insurance policies. Frank later told me he felt uncomfortable with how quickly Linda shifted conversations away from Dad's treatment and toward financial planning. She seemed more concerned about securing her inheritance than helping her husband recover. As Dad's condition worsened throughout the summer, Linda's mask slipped more frequently when she thought no one was paying attention. I overheard her on the phone with her sister Margaret laughing about how she couldn't wait for all this medical drama to be over so she could start living her real life. She talked about selling the house and moving somewhere warm where nobody knew her sad story. The coldness in her voice when discussing Dad's deteriorating health made me realize I was living with someone capable of genuine cruelty. 3 days after Dad's funeral, Linda sat me down at the same kitchen table where we used to eat Sunday dinners as a family. The insurance checks and business settlement papers were spread out in front of her like a treasure map, and her eyes had a brightness I had never seen before. She folded her hands calmly and looked at me with the expression of someone delivering a business presentation rather than talking to her grieving son. "Courtney," she said, using the tone she normally reserved for discussing household chores, "now that your father is gone, I think it's time for us to be honest about our situation." She gestured toward the financial documents as if they explained everything. "I'm inheriting everything. The business, the investments, the life insurance policies. All of it totals just over $5 million. That means I no longer need to pretend we're some kind of happy family." The words hit me like a physical blow, but Linda continued without any emotion in her voice. "I've given you 30 days to find somewhere else to live. I'm selling this house and buying a condo in Sarasota, where I can finally have the retirement I deserve." When I started to speak, she held up her hand to silence me. "Before you say anything about what your father wanted, let me remind you that dead people don't make decisions. The living do. And I've decided that my obligation to support you ended the moment those checks cleared." Linda stood up from the table and walked toward the stairs, pausing only to deliver her final blow. "I've already contacted a realtor and they think the house will sell quickly in this market. You might want to start looking at apartments in your price range, which I imagine is considerably lower than what you've been accustomed to here." Her smile was the coldest thing I had ever seen, and in that moment, I realized that my mother had been waiting 25 years for this opportunity to finally get rid of me. What Linda didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment since Dad's cancer diagnosis took a turn for the worse 6 months earlier. The small recording device he had given me was hidden inside what looked like an ordinary pen, and I had been documenting every cruel comment and heartless conversation she thought no one else could hear. Dad had pressed the device into my hand one evening after Linda left to get her nails done, his eyes serious despite the pain medication making him drowsy. "Son," he had whispered, glancing toward the doorway to make sure she wasn't coming back. "I've been married to your mother for 28 years, and I know how her mind works. If something happens to me, you're going to need proof of who she really is underneath all that fake concern." His words had chilled me at the time, but I followed his advice and started recording everything Linda said when she thought Dad couldn't hear her clearly. The recordings captured conversations that would have shocked anyone who knew Linda's public persona. There were phone calls with her sister Margaret where she complained about having to play nursemaid to a dying man, and how exhausting it was to pretend she cared about his recovery. She talked about researching assisted living facilities for me, claiming she couldn't wait to ship me off somewhere so she could enjoy her inheritance without dealing with a grown man who never learned independence. Working as an IT specialist at Huntington Bank had given me skills that proved invaluable during those months of secret documentation. I created encrypted backup files of every recording and stored them in multiple secure locations that Linda could never access. My position also gave me insight into financial fraud patterns, and I started noticing irregularities in how Linda was handling Dad's accounts during his illness. The first red flag appeared when I discovered she had been forging Dad's signature on several bank documents, moving money from business accounts into her personal savings without his knowledge. As his condition deteriorated, Linda had convinced Dad to give her power of attorney, claiming it would make handling medical bills easier. Instead, she used that authority to systematically drain accounts and redirect automatic deposits from his business partnership with Frank. My investigation revealed that Linda had been meeting with a divorce attorney named Patricia Wells, apparently planning to divorce Dad if he recovered from cancer. The attorney's notes, which I obtained through a contact at their law firm, showed that Linda wanted to ensure she would receive maximum assets in either scenario, divorce or death. She had been calculating how to void Dad's will if he survived and how to maximize insurance payouts if he didn't. The most disturbing discovery came when I found documentation showing Linda had been researching Dad's life insurance policies and pension plans months before his diagnosis became terminal. She had contacted multiple insurance companies to understand exactly how much money she would receive and under what circumstances. Some of the inquiry dates showed she had been planning for his death even while he was still responding well to treatment. During this investigation period, I reconnected with Frank, Dad's business partner of 15 years. Frank had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with Linda's behavior around the office, particularly her sudden interest in financial details she had never cared about before. When I shared some of my concerns with him, he revealed that Dad had privately expressed worries about Linda's motives and had asked Frank to keep an eye on Courtney if anything happened to him. Frank introduced me to Sarah Patterson, Dad's longtime attorney who had handled the business incorporation and estate planning. Sarah had been suspicious of some recent changes Linda had requested to Dad's will, particularly modifications that would have given Linda complete control over all assets and eliminated provisions Dad had made for my education and future. When Dad was too sick to review the documents carefully, Linda had pressured him to sign revisions that Sarah felt were not in his best interests. Through my childhood friend Marcus, who had become an investigative journalist for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, I learned how to properly document evidence and build a case that would stand up to legal scrutiny. Marcus had covered several elder abuse cases during his career, and immediately recognized the pattern of financial manipulation Linda was following. He agreed to help me research her background and look into whether she had exhibited similar behavior in other relationships. The most shocking discovery came when Marcus uncovered Linda's history with her first husband, Gerald Thompson, who had died in a suspicious car accident 12 years before she met Dad. Gerald had owned a successful construction company in Akron, and Linda had inherited the entire business after his death, selling it within months for a substantial profit. The accident report showed some inconsistencies that had never been fully investigated, and Gerald's family had always suspected Linda's involvement but could never prove anything. While building my case, I made sure to maintain normal routines so Linda wouldn't suspect I was gathering evidence against her. I continued working at the bank, helped with Dad's care as much as she would allow, and played the role of the grief-stricken son who was too overwhelmed to pay attention to financial matters. Linda seemed satisfied that I was remaining passive and uninformed about the inheritance details. The breakthrough moment came when I was helping clean out Dad's home office after his death. Hidden behind some old business files, I found a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 1 week before he died, along with account information for a secret savings account he had established specifically for my education and future. The account contained $50,000 that Linda had no knowledge of, and Dad's letter explained that he had suspected she would try to cut me out of the inheritance completely. Dad's letter revealed that he had been aware of Linda's true nature for much longer than I realized. He wrote about catching her in several lies about her first marriage and about finding evidence that she had been stealing small amounts from his business accounts for years. Most importantly, he revealed that he had updated his will just 2 weeks before his death, but Linda had hidden the new will and submitted only the old version to probate court. The new will, which Dad had secretly filed with a different attorney in Cincinnati, left me 50% of all assets and established a trust that prevented Linda from selling the family home for 5 years. It also contained specific language about Linda's behavior and his concerns about her treatment of me. Dad had anticipated that Linda would try to hide this document, so he had created multiple copies and hidden them in locations only I would think to search. Armed with recordings, financial evidence, legal documents, and testimony from people who had witnessed Linda's behavior, I realized that I had everything needed to challenge her inheritance claim and expose her fraud. The moment she told me to leave the house because she no longer needed me was exactly what Dad had predicted would happen. She had finally shown her true colors completely, and I had captured every word on tape. As I finished packing my belongings that day, I felt a mixture of sadness for losing Dad and anticipation for the justice that was coming. Linda thought she had won the ultimate victory by inheriting millions and getting rid of the son she had never wanted. Instead, she had just provided the final piece of evidence that would bring her carefully constructed scheme crashing down around her. The following morning, Linda orchestrated my departure like a military operation designed to maximize humiliation. She had recruited her sister Margaret and Margaret's boyfriend Troy to serve as witnesses and enforcers, ensuring I couldn't linger or take anything she claimed belonged to her. Margaret arrived wearing expensive jewelry and designer sunglasses, clearly excited to participate in what she saw as Linda's moment of triumph over the son who had been a burden for too many years. Troy, a sleazy 40-something construction worker with prison tattoos covering his arms, seemed to enjoy the power dynamic of intimidating someone he perceived as weak. He made a show of checking his watch every few minutes and commenting loudly about how long it was taking me to gather my belongings. "Come on, college boy," he sneered, while I carefully packed Dad's old photo albums. "Your mother's got places to be and money to spend." Margaret wandered through the house like she was appraising merchandise, pointing out furniture and decorations she thought Linda should sell, versus items that might be worth keeping for the new condo. "You definitely don't need all these family pictures," she told Linda while gesturing toward framed photos of me and Dad at various baseball games and school events. "Fresh start means fresh decorations, right?" Linda had already begun the process of erasing Dad's presence from the house, with disturbing efficiency. His favorite recliner, where he used to read evening newspapers and help me with homework, had been moved to the garage with a free sign taped to the front. His collection of insurance industry awards and business achievements had been boxed up and placed near the trash cans, as if decades of professional success meant nothing now that he wasn't alive to defend his legacy. The cruelest touch was how Linda had rearranged the living room to remove every trace of our family history together. Wedding photos had been replaced with generic landscape prints from a discount store, and the mantelpiece that once displayed my football trophies and Dad's business recognition plaques now held only Linda's collection of decorative candles and a small mirror that reflected her image back at her constantly. When Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor, stopped by to check on how we were coping with Dad's death, Linda delivered an Oscar-worthy performance about being a struggling widow forced to make difficult financial decisions. She dabbed at her eyes with tissues while explaining how heartbroken she was to lose the house, but that she simply couldn't afford to maintain such a large property on her fixed income. "I'm sacrificing everything to help Courtney become independent," Linda said with fake motherly concern, placing her hand over her heart dramatically. Robert would have wanted him to learn responsibility instead of depending on his mother forever. Mrs. Henderson, who had observed our family dynamics for 15 years and remembered Linda's coldness during Dad's illness, listened politely, but didn't seem convinced by the performance. After Mrs. Henderson left, Linda dropped the Grieving Widow Act immediately and returned to supervising my departure with military precision. She had prepared an itemized list of everything in the house and was checking off items to ensure I didn't take anything she considered valuable. Even personal gifts Dad had given me over the years required her approval, and she confiscated several items, claiming they were family heirlooms that belonged with the house. The final humiliation came as I loaded my car with the few possessions Linda deemed acceptable for me to take. She presented me with a handwritten bill for back rent and utilities, totaling $12,000, claiming Dad would have wanted me to learn financial responsibility even after his death. The bill included charges for utilities dating back 3 years' meals I had eaten at the family table, and even depreciation costs for wearing out furniture and appliances. "I expect payment within 60 days, Linda announced while Troy nodded approvingly behind her. "Or I'll be forced to take legal action to recover what you owe this estate." She had already calculated that my salary at the bank would make the debt nearly impossible to pay quickly, setting up another opportunity to humiliate me when I inevitably fell behind on her arbitrary payment schedule. As I started my car and prepared to leave, the only home I had ever known Linda delivered her parting shot with the coldest smile I had ever seen. "Don't think you can come crawling back here when reality hits you?" she called out loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "I've already had the locks changed and you're no longer welcome on this property for any reason." Margaret and Troy laughed as I drove away, and I could see Linda in my rearview mirror already talking on her phone, probably calling the realtor to schedule a showing, now that the unpleasant business of evicting her son had been completed. The house that had been my home for 25 years was already transforming into just another piece of real estate in her portfolio. 20 minutes later, as I sat in a McDonald's parking lot trying to process what had just happened, my phone rang with a call that would change everything. Sarah Patterson, Dad's attorney, was calling with information that Linda had no idea was coming. "Courtney," she said, her voice tense with urgency, "I need to see you immediately. There are some things about your father's will that your mother doesn't want you to know." Sarah explained that Dad had secretly updated his will just 2 weeks before his death, creating a new document that divided his assets equally between Linda and me, while establishing protections to prevent Linda from selling the house or liquidating investments for 5 years. The new will also included specific language about Linda's behavior during his illness and his concerns about her treatment of me. "Your mother has submitted the old will to probate court and is pretending the new one doesn't exist," Sarah continued. "That's insurance fraud, inheritance fraud, and perjury. but I need evidence of her deceptive behavior to challenge the probate and prove she's acting in bad faith. As I sat in that parking lot surrounded by all my worldly possessions, crammed into the back of a 10-year-old Honda Civic, I realized that Linda had just made the biggest mistake of her life. By throwing me out so cruelly and showing her true nature so completely, she had given me the motivation and justification I needed to use every piece of evidence Dad had helped me gather. The war she thought she had won was just beginning. The meeting with Sarah Patterson and Frank took place the next morning in Frank's office at what had been Dad's insurance business. Sitting in the conference room where Dad had built his company over 2 decades, surrounded by industry awards and client testimonials that Linda was planning to throw away, I felt his presence guiding me toward the justice he had known would be necessary. Sarah spread the documents across the conference table like a detective organizing evidence for a major case. The contrast between the two wills was stark and damning. The original will, which Linda had submitted to probate court, left everything to her with only a small educational fund for me. The updated will, hidden from Linda and filed secretly with Sarah's partner in Cincinnati, divided assets equally and included pages of specific concerns about Linda's behavior and character. Your father was very methodical about documenting his reasons for these changes, Sarah explained, pointing to several paragraphs where Dad had detailed Linda's coldness toward me and her suspicious interest in his financial accounts during his illness. He specifically mentions her lack of maternal affection, her attempts to isolate you from family decisions, and his belief that she was more interested in his money than his recovery. Frank added his own observations about Linda's behavior during the final months of Dad's life. She started showing up to business meetings she had never attended before, asking detailed questions about company valuations and insurance policies, he said, shaking his head sadly. Robert confided in me that he was worried about her motives and asked me to watch out for you if anything happened to him. When I played the recordings I had made, both Sarah and Frank were visibly shocked by Linda's coldness and calculated cruelty. The conversation where she told Margaret she couldn't wait for Dad's medical drama to be over so she could start enjoying her inheritance particularly disturbed them. Sarah immediately recognized that Linda's recorded statements constituted evidence of fraud and elder abuse that could result in criminal charges. She's not just hiding a will, Sarah explained grimly. She's committed multiple felonies by submitting false documents to probate court while concealing evidence that contradicts her claims. The recordings prove she was planning to defraud you of your inheritance before your father even died. Marcus arrived from Cleveland that afternoon, bringing his experience as an investigative journalist and his contacts in law enforcement. After listening to the recordings and reviewing the financial documents I had discovered, he immediately saw the potential for a major story about inheritance fraud and elder abuse. His preliminary research had already uncovered disturbing patterns in Linda's past that supported our suspicions about her character. Your mother's first husband died in a car accident that was never properly investigated, Marcus told us, consulting his notes. Gerald Thompson owned a construction company worth approximately $2 million, and Linda inherited everything despite being married to him for less than 3 years. She sold the business within 6 months and moved to Columbus, where she eventually met your father. The timeline Marcus had constructed showed that Linda had a clear pattern of targeting successful older men and positioning herself to benefit financially from their deaths. Gerald's family had always suspected foul play, but lacked the resources to challenge the accident investigation or contest the inheritance. They were eager to provide testimony about Linda's behavior if our case went to court. Frank's business connections provided additional evidence of Linda's suspicious activities. Several clients had contacted him after reading Dad's obituary, reporting that Linda had called them asking questions about their policies and whether they might be interested in transferring their business to a new agency she was considering purchasing. She had been planning to liquidate Dad's client base for quick cash rather than maintaining the relationships he had spent decades building. Mrs. Henderson proved to be a crucial witness when Sarah interviewed her about Linda's behavior during Dad's illness. Our neighbor had observed Linda's transformation from disinterested wife to devoted caregiver whenever other people were present, followed by her return to coldness and impatience when she thought no one was watching. Mrs. Henderson had even overheard phone conversations where Linda complained about the burden of caring for a sick husband. The hospice nurse who had visited our house during Dad's final weeks provided another important perspective on Linda's behavior. Jennifer Morrison had 30 years of experience caring for terminal patients and their families, and she immediately recognized that Linda's concern for Dad seemed performative rather than genuine. Jennifer remembered Linda asking inappropriate questions about accelerating Dad's timeline and making comments about when his suffering would finally end. Building this coalition of evidence and witnesses was emotionally exhausting for me, especially while dealing with the practical challenges of sudden homelessness. I spent the first week sleeping in cheap motels when I could afford them, and in my car when I couldn't. The stress of fighting Linda's fraud while struggling to survive financially began affecting my performance at work, where my supervisor warned me about tardiness and distraction. The lowest point came on a rainy Thursday night when I called the suicide prevention hotline from a gas station parking lot, overwhelmed by grief for Dad and anger at Linda's betrayal. The counselor helped me realize that Dad had given me the tools to fight back for a reason, and that giving up would mean letting Linda's cruelty win completely. I found strength in knowing that Dad had anticipated this battle and trusted me to see it through. Marcus's investigation into Linda's background yielded our first major breakthrough when he discovered she had been systematically researching Dad's finances and business partnerships months before his cancer diagnosis became serious. Computer records from the public library showed she had been accessing online resources about inheritance law and insurance fraud, learning how to maximize her potential payout and minimize complications from family members. Even more damning was Marcus's discovery that Linda had contacted a private investigator to research Dad's business assets and personal accounts, claiming she was concerned about his erratic behavior and needed to protect family finances. The investigator's report, which Marcus obtained through a source in the industry, showed Linda was specifically interested in identifying hidden assets and offshore accounts that might not be covered in Dad's will. The breakthrough that transformed our case from civil litigation to criminal investigation came when Linda made a crucial mistake driven by panic and desperation. Realizing that people were asking questions about her inheritance claim, she contacted my supervisor at Huntington Bank and filed a false report claiming I had stolen money from her accounts. She provided fabricated bank statements and forged documents to support her accusation, hoping to get me fired and destroy my credibility before any legal action could proceed. Linda's plan backfired spectacularly when my supervisor, who had worked in banking fraud detection for 15 years, immediately recognized her documents as forgeries. The fake statements contained errors that no legitimate bank would make, and the signatures were obviously copied rather than original. Instead of destroying my reputation, Linda had provided us with proof of her willingness to commit document fraud and perjury. "She just handed us everything we need to file criminal charges," Sarah said after examining Linda's forged documents. "This isn't just inheritance fraud anymore. She's committed federal crimes by creating false banking records and filing fraudulent reports with a financial institution." With criminal evidence in hand, our coalition was ready to move from gathering information to taking action. Linda thought she had eliminated the only threat to her inheritance scheme by throwing me out of the house. Instead, she had unleashed a carefully planned counterattack that would expose every crime she had committed and cost her everything she thought she had won. Sarah Patterson filed our legal counteroffensive on a Monday morning that would forever change Linda's world. The courthouse documents included motions to challenge the probate of the false will requests for temporary restraining orders against Linda's disposal of Dad's assets and formal criminal fraud charges backed by extensive evidence. Within hours, a judge had frozen all of Linda's accounts pending investigation, trapping the $5 million she thought were safely in her control. Linda's attorney, Gary Brennan, was the expensive lawyer known for defending wealthy clients in white-collar crime cases. His reputation for aggressive tactics and legal maneuvering made him exactly the kind of representation Linda needed. But even Brennan seemed surprised by the volume and quality of evidence we had assembled against his client. The recordings, financial documents, and witness testimony created a case that would be difficult to defend even with unlimited resources. The first sign that our strategy was working came when Linda called me frantically, her voice shaking with panic for the first time since Dad's funeral. "You need to stop this nonsense immediately," she demanded. But the confident superiority she had shown during my eviction had been replaced by genuine fear. "This is all a misunderstanding that's gotten out of hand. We can work something out that benefits everyone." Her sudden willingness to negotiate proved that the frozen accounts had gotten her attention, but Sarah had warned me not to engage in any direct communication that might compromise our legal position. Linda's desperation grew more obvious as the reality of her situation sank in. She had been counting on immediate access to Dad's money to fund her luxury retirement, and the court injunction had trapped her in the same financial uncertainty she had tried to force on me. Meanwhile, Marcus's exposé for the Cleveland Plain Dealer was creating a media sensation that extended far beyond our local community. His article, titled "The Inheritance Predator: How One Woman Built a Pattern of Elder Abuse," detailed Linda's history with her first husband and the suspicious circumstances surrounding Gerald Thompson's death 12 years earlier. The story included interviews with Gerald's family members who had always suspected Linda's involvement, but lacked the resources to investigate. The article went viral on social media within hours of publication, generating thousands of comments from readers who shared their own experiences with inheritance fraud and family betrayal. Local television stations picked up the story, and soon Linda's photograph was appearing on news broadcasts throughout Ohio. The woman who had craved attention and sympathy as a grieving widow was getting more publicity than she had ever wanted. The media attention triggered an unexpected consequence that none of us had anticipated. Dad's former employees, who had been laid off when Linda immediately closed the business after his death, organized a support fund to help me with legal expenses and living costs. These were people who had worked with Dad for years and witnessed Linda's transformation from disinterested wife to suddenly involved business partner during his final months. Local businesses began reaching out to offer me temporary employment and housing assistance. The owner of a small computer repair shop offered me part-time work that paid better than my bank position, and several families volunteered spare rooms while I fought to reclaim my inheritance. The community response overwhelmed me with its generosity and reminded me that Dad's reputation for fairness and integrity had earned lasting respect from people throughout Columbus. My former college teammates started a social media campaign called Justice for Courtney that gained thousands of followers and attracted national attention to our case. Sports journalists who had covered my football career wrote supportive articles about the contrast between Linda's public persona and her private cruelty. The campaign raised money for my legal fees and created pressure for law enforcement to investigate Linda's crimes thoroughly. Linda's response to the growing media coverage revealed her desperation and poor judgment under pressure. She granted interviews to local television reporters, apparently believing she could manipulate public opinion in her favor. Instead, her performances came across as cold and calculating, particularly when she claimed I was an ungrateful son who was fabricating evidence because I was upset about being encouraged to become independent. The breaking point in Linda's media strategy came during a live interview with Channel 6 News, when the reporter asked her to respond to specific quotes from the recordings Marcus had published. Linda's face went white as she heard her own voice saying she couldn't wait for Dad's medical drama to end so she could start enjoying her inheritance. The look of shock and panic when she realized her private conversations had been documented, was broadcast to thousands of viewers. Her attorney Gary Brennan struggled to control the damage from Linda's disastrous media appearances, but the evidence was too overwhelming to explain away convincingly. During depositions, he attempted to portray Linda as a grieving widow who had been misunderstood and taken advantage of by manipulative family members, but the recordings of her conversations with Margaret made that defense impossible to sustain. The investigation took a dramatic turn when the FBI became involved after discovering connections between Linda's case and a larger pattern of inheritance fraud they had been tracking. Linda's boyfriend Troy, who had seemed like just another lowlife attracted to her, money turned out to be under investigation for his involvement in a sophisticated scheme targeting wealthy widowers through online dating platforms. Federal agents raided the luxury condo Linda and Troy had purchased with Dad's money, uncovering evidence that their relationship was part of a calculated fraud operation. Troy had been using fake dating profiles to identify vulnerable men with substantial assets, and Linda had been his most successful accomplice in what appeared to be a multi-state criminal enterprise. The most shocking discovery came when agents found documents showing that Linda and Troy had been planning to murder Dad if the divorce strategy failed to maximize her inheritance. They had researched methods for inducing heart attacks and had discussed helping Robert along if his cancer treatment showed signs of success. The case was no longer just about inheritance fraud, but potentially involved conspiracy to commit murder. Linda's world collapsed completely when Troy, facing federal charges and the possibility of life in prison, provided evidence against her to reduce his own sentence. He revealed that Linda had been drugging Dad's pain medication to make him more compliant during document signings, and had spoken frequently about accelerating his death if necessary. The woman who had pretended to be a devoted caregiver had been slowly poisoning her dying husband. As Linda sat in federal custody awaiting trial, the $5 million she had counted on spending in Florida remained frozen in court-controlled accounts. The inheritance she had schemed for years to obtain was slipping through her fingers, and the son she had tried to destroy was emerging as the hero in a story that had captured national attention. Her carefully constructed plan was unraveling faster than she could have imagined possible. The FBI raid on Linda and Troy's condo uncovered a sophisticated operation that extended far beyond simple inheritance fraud. Federal agents discovered detailed files on dozens of wealthy widowers across multiple states, complete with financial profiles, family dynamics, and vulnerability assessments. Linda and Troy had been operating what investigators described as a Black Widow scheme, targeting successful older men through carefully orchestrated online dating encounters. The evidence seized during the raid painted a picture of calculated predators who had refined their techniques through years of practice. Troy's computer contained detailed instructions for creating false personas on dating websites, identifying men who had recently lost wives or were dealing with serious illnesses, and manipulating their emotions to gain access to their finances. Linda's role had been to serve as the perfect girlfriend who gradually isolated these men from their families while positioning herself to inherit their assets. Linda's breakdown during federal questioning was captured on video and later used as evidence in court. Faced with overwhelming proof of her crimes, she suffered a complete emotional collapse that revealed the rage and entitlement she had hidden beneath her fake, concerned widow performance. She screamed at investigators, blaming me for destroying her life and claiming Dad had never loved me anyway. The outburst was filmed by courthouse reporters and shared widely, generating massive public sympathy for my situation. The most damaging evidence against Linda came from her own communications, which federal agents recovered from encrypted messaging apps she thought were secure. Her conversations with Troy revealed the true extent of their plans, including detailed discussions about the best methods for hastening Dad's death and strategies for eliminating me as a potential obstacle to her inheritance. She had researched everything from medication interactions to staged accidents, demonstrating a level of premeditation that shocked even experienced investigators. Troy's cooperation with federal prosecutors provided the final pieces of evidence needed to charge Linda with first-degree murder conspiracy. He testified that Linda had shown him how to inject additional doses of morphine into Dad's IV line during hospital visits, claiming it would ease his suffering while actually working to accelerate his death. Security footage from the hospital, which prosecutors obtained after Troy's testimony, showed Linda performing suspicious actions near Dad's IV equipment when nurses were not present. The medical examiner's review of Dad's death became a crucial element in the prosecution's case. While the original cause of death had been listed as complications from pancreatic cancer, a more detailed analysis of his final weeks revealed suspicious patterns in his decline. The levels of medication in his system during his last days were inconsistent with prescribed dosages, suggesting someone had been administering additional drugs without medical supervision. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the oncologist who had treated Dad, provided testimony that contradicted Linda's claims about his final wishes and mental state. Dr. Chen remembered Linda pressuring her to increase Dad's pain medication beyond recommended levels and asking inappropriate questions about how much morphine would be needed to keep him comfortable. The doctor had found Linda's behavior concerning at the time, but had not suspected criminal intent. The community response to revelations about Linda's crimes was overwhelmingly supportive of my fight for justice. Local businesses organized fundraising events, and the GoFundMe campaign for my legal expenses exceeded $100,000 within a week. Ohio State University invited me to speak about elder abuse awareness, and Harvard Law School offered me a full scholarship to pursue legal studies with a focus on inheritance fraud prevention. Linda's sister Margaret, who had participated in my humiliating eviction, was arrested as an accessory after investigators discovered she had helped Linda research Dad's insurance policies and had received payments for her assistance in the scheme. Margaret's cooperation with prosecutors, in exchange for a reduced sentence, provided additional evidence about Linda's long-term planning and her lack of genuine emotion about Dad's illness. The resurrection of Dad's insurance business became a symbol of triumph over Linda's destructive greed. Frank and I announced our partnership to rebuild the company with a focus on protecting elderly clients from financial abuse. Several of Dad's former clients specifically requested to transfer their policies to the new agency, saying they wanted to support the son of a man who had treated them with integrity and respect for decades. Major news outlets began following my story as an example of how one person could fight back against sophisticated financial predators and win justice for vulnerable families. CNN interviewed me about the warning signs of inheritance fraud, and I appeared on national television programs to discuss how families could protect themselves from manipulation by relatives with criminal intent. The insurance industry recognized the rebuilt business as a model for ethical practices and fraud prevention. We received an award from the Ohio Insurance Commissioner's Office for developing new protocols to identify and report suspected elder abuse. The agency Dad had built from nothing was not only restored, but was becoming more successful than ever by specializing in protection and advocacy for older clients. Linda's trial became a media sensation that drew national attention to the problem of inheritance fraud and family betrayal. Legal experts called it one of the most comprehensive cases of elder abuse they had ever seen prosecuted at the federal level. The evidence was so overwhelming that Linda's expensive legal team focused on negotiating a plea agreement rather than mounting a serious defense. The final blow to Linda's case came when investigators discovered that she had been planning to frame me for Dad's murder if her inheritance scheme had been challenged. Documents found in her possession included forged evidence suggesting I had been stealing from Dad's business and had threatened him when he discovered the theft. She had been prepared to destroy my life completely to protect her criminal enterprise. As Linda's trial approached its conclusion, the woman who had thought she was clever enough to steal $5 million and eliminate the son she had never wanted was facing multiple life sentences for her crimes. The inheritance she had murdered for was being restored to its rightful beneficiary, and the community she had tried to deceive was celebrating the triumph of justice over greed. The jury's verdict was delivered on a cold December morning, exactly 1 year after Dad's death. Linda was found guilty on all counts: first-degree murder conspiracy to commit murder, inheritance fraud, elder abuse, and racketeering. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, noting that her crimes represented a particularly heinous betrayal of trust and family bonds. Troy received 25 years for his role in the conspiracy, and Margaret was sentenced to 5 years for her participation as an accessory. The court ordered the complete restoration of all assets to me, plus additional damages totaling $2 million from the insurance companies that had been defrauded by Linda's false claims. The $5 million inheritance Dad had intended for our family was finally mine, along with the family home that Linda had tried to sell and the business that represented Dad's life work and values. Standing in the courthouse after the sentencing, surrounded by the team of people who had helped me fight for justice, I felt Dad's presence more strongly than at any time since his death. Sarah Patterson, Frank Marcus, and all the supporters who had believed in our cause had proven that truth and determination could triumph over even the most sophisticated criminal schemes. The first thing I did with the inheritance was establish the Robert Daniels Foundation for Elder Abuse Prevention, using $500,000 to create an organization that would provide legal aid and support for families facing situations similar to mine. The foundation's mission became providing resources for people who suspected their elderly relatives were being manipulated or abused by family members or caregivers seeking financial gain. Returning to Harvard Law School on a full scholarship allowed me to transform my personal experience into expertise that could help others. I specialized in estate law and elder abuse prevention, learning the legal strategies that predators used to manipulate vulnerable people, and developing better protections for potential victims. My professors encouraged me to write about my case for legal journals, helping establish new precedents for prosecuting inheritance fraud. The rebuilt insurance agency flourished under Frank's and my partnership, becoming the largest independent insurance company in Ohio within 3 years. Our specialization in protecting elderly clients from financial abuse attracted customers from across the Midwest who wanted to work with agents they could trust to have their best interests at heart. Every policy we wrote included protections and monitoring systems designed to prevent the kind of abuse Linda had perpetrated against Dad. My personal healing came through reconnecting with extended family members who had been alienated by Linda's manipulations during Dad's illness. My Uncle David and Aunt Patricia, who had tried to visit Dad, but had been blocked by Linda's claims that he was too sick for company, became the surrogate parents I had needed during the darkest period of my life. They helped me understand that Dad's love had been genuine, even when Linda's coldness made me doubt my worth as a son. The national attention my case received led to new federal legislation strengthening penalties for inheritance fraud and elder abuse. The Robert Daniels Act, named in honor of my father, requires additional oversight for inheritance claims involving substantial assets and creates federal resources for investigating suspicious circumstances around the deaths of wealthy elderly individuals. 3 years after Linda's conviction, I met Amanda Richardson, a fellow attorney, who specialized in victim advocacy and had followed my case through law school. Our shared commitment to protecting vulnerable people created an immediate connection, and we discovered that our different areas of expertise complemented each other perfectly. Amanda understood the emotional toll of fighting for justice against family members who were supposed to provide love and protection. Our wedding took place in the same church where Dad and his first wife had been married 35 years earlier, before Linda entered our lives and brought so much pain and deception. Frank served as my best man, and Mrs. Henderson, now in her 80s, but still sharp and caring, gave a reading about the importance of chosen family when blood relatives failed to provide love and support. Amanda and I purchased a house just 3 blocks from the family home where I grew up, close enough that I could walk past and remember the good times with Dad, while being far enough away to create new memories in a space that Linda had never contaminated with her presence. We converted Dad's old office into a nursery when Amanda became pregnant with our first child. Our son was born on Dad's birthday, and we named him Robert Daniel, honoring both my father's memory and the journey that had brought justice to our family. Holding my son in the same hospital where Dad had died, I felt the circle of life completing itself in a way that proved love and truth were stronger than hatred and deception. The Robert Daniels Foundation has now helped over 800 families avoid or escape inheritance fraud, and our educational programs have reached thousands of elderly Americans who learn to recognize the warning signs of financial manipulation. The Foundation's success has attracted support from major insurance companies and legal organizations who want to be associated with ethical practices and victim advocacy. Linda died in federal prison 5 years after her conviction, alone and forgotten, while the family and community she had tried to destroy continued thriving and growing stronger. Her death received no media attention and was mourned by no one, the natural end for someone who had spent her life taking rather than giving and had destroyed every relationship she claimed to value. Standing at Dad's grave on the anniversary of his death, holding my son, and surrounded by the family and friends who had supported our fight for justice, I reflected on the lessons his struggle had taught me. Real family isn't determined by blood, but by love, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Dad's true legacy wasn't the money Linda had tried to steal, but the values he had instilled in me, and the courage he had given me to fight for what was right. The pain Linda inflicted on our family was real and lasting, but it ultimately made me stronger and more determined to protect others from similar abuse. Dad's death wasn't in vain because it exposed Linda's crimes and led to changes that will protect countless families in the future. Sometimes the greatest victories come from the darkest defeats, and the love we thought we had lost returns in new forms when we're brave enough to fight for truth. My story proves that no matter how powerful or clever our abusers think they are, justice is possible when good people work together and refuse to give up. The inheritance Linda murdered for became the foundation for helping others, and the son she tried to destroy became the man who ensured her crimes were punished and her victims were remembered with honor and dignity. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone who was supposed to love and protect you? Share your story in the comments below, and remember that you're not alone in your struggle for justice and healing. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about ordinary people who found the strength to fight back against those who wronged them. Share this with someone who needs to know that truth and determination can triumph over even the most sophisticated deception. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that every ending can become a new beginning when we have the courage to fight for what's right.